welcome to another episode of Lovehorsepower.com. Today is the third and final segment of our head gasket series on this 91 MR2 Turbo. We'll be showing you how to reinstall the exhaust manifold, intake manifold, distributor, EGR, cruise, coolant neck, all the stuff that needs to go back on to get this thing done. We'll also be showing you how to reinstall the timing belt, which on the MR2 is a little bit tricky. So what do you say we get started and get this thing finished up? Make sure to lubricate the ARP nuts before installing them. Use the moly lube included with the stud kit, and don't be scared to be generous. The kit includes plenty. Now we can torque those ARP nuts down. I followed the recommended ARP torque procedure and tightened the nuts in several passes up to 60 foot-pounds. Then I loosened and retorqued 5 times. Yeah, it takes a while. Make sure to torque the nuts in the correct order according to the service manual. Finally, make sure they are all torqued to 60 foot-pounds. It's generally a good idea to retorque the nuts after about 200 miles of driving. Next up, let's bolt that exhaust manifold and turbo assembly back up. Because of the aftermarket setup on this MR2 Turbo, this is quite a bit easier than the stock turbo catalytic converter assembly. So if you've got the stock setup, it's going to take you a little bit longer to perform this step. Visit Lovehorsepower.com for some tips that will help with the stock arrangement. Make sure to use a good amount of anti-seize on those studs. It will save you headaches in the future. Okay, it's on to the timing belt. Now we're going to show you how to completely reinstall a brand new timing belt on this MR2 Turbo. I'm not going to lie to you though, the timing belt on the MR2 is a pain. You are in for some hurt. But don't worry, we got some tips and hints that will make this a lot easier. Now we'll basically follow the service manual procedure, but with those changes to help us out. So first, we got to get that crankshaft pulley off. Now if you can't get it off with a wrench or with an impact gun, you can use a little trick using the MR2 starter to turn that bolt off. All you need is a wrench long enough that you can brace against the garage floor. So get your 19mm socket and brace that wrench on the garage floor, keeping in mind that the crankshaft pulley turns clockwise. Then flip the starter a couple times. That starter has amazing torque, it'll turn that thing right on off. Then you got to pick yourself up a crankshaft pulley puller. Now we rented this one at Advanced Auto Parts for free. So now let's get a fresh new time belt installed and get it done. First, we need to recompress the timing belt tensioner. Use a vise or C-clamp to compress it. Perform this step slowly. Take your time, otherwise you could damage the internals of the tensioner. Compress the tensioner, wait several seconds, then compress it further until you align the hole in the tensioner body with the hole in the tensioner pin. Once those two holes are lined up, use a small Allen wrench and lock the tensioner in place. With the tensioner prepared, you can loosely install it on the head before putting the head onto the block. In the likely scenario of not getting the belt on correctly your first try, you'll have to remove the tensioner again. A good way to get easier access to the tensioner while the head is on the block is to remove the intake cam pulley. Then you'll have easier access to the 2 bolts that hold the tensioner onto the head. With the timing belt removed from the engine, you may want to take this opportunity to replace an aging water pump and or an oil pump. You can do both with the engine in the car. If you want to replace the oil pump because, for example, it's seized, don't ask how I know, you will need to remove the oil pan. You will also want to replace the crankshaft seal. The water pump is pretty straightforward to replace. Just be sure to align the wiggle valve on the thermostat with the mark on the water pump housing. Using the crankshaft pulley bolt, turn the crankshaft so that the key groove is pointing upward. Then install a new belt around the crankshaft timing pulley, oil pump, number 2 idler pulley, water pump, and the number 1 idler pulley. Note the location of the bolt holes for the engine mounting bracket. These can be tricky to locate from up top when you install this later. Once you have the belt loosely install the timing belt guide facing the cup side outward. That's all there is to this step. That wasn't so bad, right? Now install the lower timing belt cover and the crankshaft pulley, torquing it to 80 foot-pounds. You can also now install the right-hand engine bracket. This takes some wiggling to get it lined up with the bolt holes. Just take your time with it. Next up, install the number 1 idler pulley if you haven't already, or if you removed it to give yourself more room for the previous step. Make sure to use Loctite on that bolt. Also make sure that you have the tensioner loosely installed. Follow the service manual procedure and set the crankshaft pulley to 0 degrees before top dead center. Using a 24mm wrench, turn the camshafts until the mark on the camshaft lines up with the mark on the number 1 bearing caps for the intake and exhaust. Some aftermarket cams, such as the HKS ones, have different marks on the camshafts, so just be aware of that. When installing the camshaft pulleys, there's a small circle mark on each pulley. Align this mark with the mark on the metal number 3 timing belt cover. Now that you got all those things lined up, install the belt. Okay, congratulations! You've got the timing belt installed. Now this is where we're going to deviate a little bit from the service manual procedure, because the next step is crazy, and you'll see why in a minute. You're going to need a buddy to help you out. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn the crankshaft 2 full revolutions to check the valve timing. What your buddy needs to do is apply 13 foot-pounds of torque using a torque wrench to the number 1 idler pulley bolt in a counterclockwise direction, pushing towards the back of the car. While they're doing that, which will tension the belt, turn the crankshaft 2 full revolutions and align the mark on the crankshaft pulley with the mark on the number 1 timing belt cover, 0 degrees before top dead center. Once that's lined up, check that the valve timing is correct up top. Check that the pulley mark is lined up with the mark on the number 3 timing belt cover. If your timing is correct, proceed to the next step. If not, just move the belt, adjust everything until you get it right. Now, why is that next step so crazy? This picture in the service manual has 3 hands in it. 3 hands. So you're definitely going to need some help, preferably someone with small hands, because there's not a lot of room to work in there. So once you have the valve timing correct, turn the crankshaft 5/6 of a revolution, almost all the way around. And then get yourself a feeler gauge, and you're going to have to set it up for 1.9 millimeters. So your typical feeler gauge, you're going to have to combo a bunch together, put some electric tape or whatever around there to hold this together. Now you need to insert this between the tensioner body and the number 1 idler pulley stopper. Not the tensioner pin, but the body. So you're going to have to jam some lights down in there and maybe some mirrors to make sure you get this in the right position. When it is in the right position, you can push on the tensioner and kind of lock this feeler gauge in place. Once you have all that set, get your buddy again, have him apply that 13 foot-pounds torque to the number 1 idler pulley bolt. While he's holding that, push on the back of the tensioner and tighten the 2 12mm bolts holding the tensioner to the head. With those tightened, you can remove the feeler gauge, you can pull that pin, that will tension the belt, and you should be good to go. Check the valve timing again, and if it's set right, congratulations, you got it done.